I have to admit that right now I'm incredibly envious of y'all. Seeing this game for the first time is truly priceless. Besides being a spectacular game, which I'll tell you in advance, it's by Mikhail Tal, one of the greatest creative geniuses chess has ever had. Furthermore, we'll find a series of patterns in this game, a series of lessons that will be excellent for us to apply later in our own games. I'm sure that at several moments in the game you'll say, well, yes, chess teacher, I would have done something completely different. I'm sure of it, because it happened to me too. So get nice and comfortable, sit back on the couch if you're watching this video on TV. And if not, save this video because you'll need to watch this game, I assure you, more than once. Alright, Mikhail Tal started with the queen's pawn. You already know, logically, one of the most popular options in history. And the player with the black pieces, whose name I don't remember, but I'll leave it for you down here in the description, played knight f6. The most common response against the queen's pawn too, as I always tell you, is the most flexible response. Why? Because now black can play many different defenses, whether it's playing, for example, the king's Indian defense with the bishop fianchetto. They can even play an orthodox defense with these types of setups, or a semi-Slav type setup. They can do so many things, even gambits like the Benoni, or even more explosive gambits like this e5 right off the bat, right? Well, the game continues with c4, the most popular response as well, d6. For the moment, it doesn't mean that the black pieces are going to play, whether it's a king's Indian or if they want to play later with c5, with e5. Let's see it next. Knight c3 and g6. Very well. Now we understand that black wants to play a king's Indian defense. Knight f3, bishop g7. For the moment, what is Mikhail Tal doing? Well, he's developing his pieces completely normally, right? He has placed his pawns on d4 and c4. A completely understandable strategy. It's usually played in the Queen's Gambit style, right? But really, the most important thing isn't the opening, friends. There are too many correct openings in chess. Choose the one you like the most, and from there, you'll see how we can draw many conclusions that go far beyond the opening. G3. A very interesting first move by Mikhail Tal. This move is known as the Catalan bishop, usually when the queen's pawn is played. Why? Because it's not going to develop along its conventional diagonal, since the c4 pawn is blocking it, right? So there is an alternative, which is to play g3 and develop the bishop to g2. An extremely popular alternative nowadays. This bishop becomes the master and commander of the long diagonal that goes from h1 to a8. And it's a diagonal where obviously things are going to happen at any moment in the game, because just look at the possibilities, right? The number of squares that bishop controls from g2. Short castle, bishop to g2. I'll go through this part a little faster because obviously we all more or less understand. Yes, some more, some less, what's happening in the game. Knight from b to d7, a completely normal move. The knight could also be developed to c6. However, obviously here, white would choose to play d5, where this knight would be left quite out of play. Let me explain. It can't jump forward comfortably. If it jumps to b4, it would have to be kicked out with a 3, and then it would have to return to a 6. It can't jump, obviously, to d4. To e5 doesn't seem like the best option, because after knight takes knight and pawn takes, we would be doubling pawns and opening up the diagonal for this bishop. Therefore, this knight is correctly developed via the d7 square, from where it can jump, for example, to b6, from where it can jump, for example, to f8, and who knows, later on to e6, or even if this advances, to g6. Or even if white wants to take advantage and gain a lot of space, this knight would already have 2 jumps into the center of the board. So obviously, we are not going to touch these pawns because the pawn that is perfectly controlling the knight from d4, you see that it is taking away the 2 possible squares at e5 and c5. So Mikhail Tal castles. He is following the basic principles, yes or no? He develops his minor pieces and castles quickly, the same thing black is doing. The difference is that now white controls the center, while black, for the moment, does not. They are controlling it from a distance, it's true. At any moment they can attack it, that's true. But for the moment, they don't control it. Obviously, on the next move, boom, black is already trying to control it. You should know that this player with the black pieces was also a world-class player. In other words, he's not going to make things easy for Mikhail Tal. First critical moment of the game where you, probably many of you, not all, wouldn't know what to do. At this moment, many of you might be thinking, well, I'll capture the pawn, I'll advance. Well, either one would be a mistake, and I'll explain why. Strong players are characterized by withstanding the tension. What does withstanding the tension mean, CHESSTEACHER? Talk to me normally, because I'm not following what you're telling me. A tension is nothing more and nothing less than two pieces that can capture each other. For example, this tension between two pawns, because white can capture and black can too, right? So the one who captures usually ends up losing. Why? Because it benefits the opponent. Let me explain. If I capture here, notice that the black pieces that were currently unable to develop well, because they were a bit stuck here, after the capture, the knight would recapture on e5, and not only would it become much more active, but it would also free up the bishop's diagonal. A much more comfortable position than 2 moves ago, right? That is why if we take here, we help black. Otherwise, if black were to take here now, they would also help white, because this knight would be excellently centralized, and they would free up the light-squared bishop, which, as you know, is on the long diagonal. Therefore, you must understand something. Neither of the two should capture. If you capture, what will you do? Well, you'll be given advantages to your opponent. You must wait for them to capture you, okay? Evaluate the tensions well. Very well. At this moment, you might think, what if I advance? Well, the thing is, if you advance, you're also gifting extremely powerful squares to your opponent. For example, this knight that couldn't advance here, you're gifting it a spectacular square on c5, from where it can start attacking very clearly. Also, who knows? You're opening the diagonal for the dark squared bishop, which was quite locked in at the moment. After the advance, black would also have the d-pawn push available, and of course open up this diagonal for the bishop as well. That's why Mikhail Tal perfectly evaluates this, let's say, position. It says, well, I'm not capturing, I'm not advancing, and I'm not moving. I'll keep improving my position. Queen to c2. The queen moves away from the central files to later place his rook. And now we will see the next problem that the player with the white pieces, Mikhail Tal, has. And forgive me, this rook is on f8. I did the example earlier and didn't move it back. I realized it because now, precisely, black plays rook to e8. Very well. What is the main threat of rook to e8? To place itself on a semi-open file that could be opened with this capture. However, if they capture, we must keep in mind that they're attacking the e2 pawn. But of course, I have the knight on c3 correctly defending that pawn. If they capture, they attack my knight, yes, but I can recapture. So I'm not worried at all for the moment about this rook to e8. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to improve one of my rooks. Since you already know that rooks are extremely happy on those potentially open files, because on an open file, logically, it can run much more. It's like having a giant dog in a super small apartment. Obviously, it wants to go out to the mountains, right? To run as much as it can to reach its full potential. Well, it's the same with rooks. Very well. At this moment, the black pieces simply play c6, a move that allows them to try to fight later on, because if you notice, they can't really do anything extraordinary either. They are a little bit locked up here behind. And now comes the key moment. Well, the key moment, one of many key moments in the game. Where would you develop this bishop, friends? Well, probably many of you would have said bishop g5, which would be an incoherent move, and I'll explain why. It's okay if you thought of this bishop g5. It's true that we are creating a pin. At some point, we could play knight e4, strengthening this pin even more. However, they would simply play h6 against us, and we would have to retreat, because bishop h4 wouldn't be possible since they would trap it. Whenever we have a fianchetto, we must be very careful not to let them trap our bishop. So we would have to retreat, and wherever we go, for example, here we would block this pawn a bit, here we would block the rook. So what do? Go back to the starting square. What a waste of time, right? So bishop g5 is not a good option. Neither are the others, right? We just saw that bishop e3 and bishop d2 would really be a bit passive, and we would be shooting ourselves in the foot, right? So look at Mikhail Tal's move, very coherent, which does the following. He plays b3 to be able to develop the bishop, either to b2, where it would be fighting against the other bishop on the long diagonal, or even at some point to a3, where it's aiming at a possible weak pawn. Why is it a weak pawn? Because if you look closely, it's a pawn that no other pawn can defend. You see it, right? Therefore, this b3 is a super interesting move. Queen c7, e4, reinforcing the center even more. At this moment, Mikhail Tal. If they capture here, do I care? No. Same as before, right? I free up my knight and I end up much better. Better not to take a 6. And now this bishop, well, he decides to develop it to a3. Well, b2 is also possible, right? From a 3, it's exerting very strong pressure, especially on the d6 pawn. And that's why here, black plays c5 to try to intercept this bishop. The idea is that now they want to do the following. The black pieces see that a square has been left. Mikhail Tal sees that an extremely weak square has been left, and this square is the d5 square. Taking advantage of it with a pawn perhaps wouldn't be the best, because it's true, we've gained space, but now our pieces are restricted back here. So he realizes that if he wants to get there with the rook, he must capture. Whether they capture with a pawn or with a knight, it's really quite indifferent. This square is already, let's say, a direct target for the white pieces to occupy. For example, with a knight, or later on also with a rook. Do you understand? At this moment, if they capture with the pawn, which would be extremely possible, black would still be unable to defend the light square bishop. That is why they capture with the knight. Do we want to take this knight with the bishop? No, because we would be giving away, let's say, a little bit of space to the black pieces. We don't want that. This bishop is going to be much more important. There are those who even say that bishops are worth more than knights. They're worth 3.5 points, while knights are only worth 3 points. Although this all depends on the position, because a knight in a position that's very closed will logically be able to jump between the pieces much better than the bishops. Therefore, here Mikhail Tal says the following. I'm not trading it, but rather I'm kicking it out. b4. Where are you going to go with this knight? Fine, to e6. Perfect, because I'm going to keep pressuring you. c5. I'm going to take advantage of the dynamics of my pieces, which are well placed, to try to open up the position. Obviously, you're going to have to capture, because if you don't capture, I'm going to capture you. And here you really are going to end up losing, right? Because I also have the rook pointing at this point. Therefore, after pawn takes pawn, many of you might think that here it's going to be recaptured. And that would be a mistake, because at this moment, if you look closely, the most attentive ones will have seen that after this advance, Mikhail Tal has given away the pawn. How do you see this? Very simple. How many pieces are defending this pawn? 1 and 2. How many are attacking it? 1, 2, and 3. He's given away the plot. But the thing is, Mikhail Tal's goal wasn't to recapture the pawn, but to take advantage of the open file. Knight to d5, threatening the queen. Obviously, the black pieces might think, well, I'll just eliminate your knight and that's it, which is what happened in the game. And after pawn takes, I simply move this knight away. Well, this wouldn't be the best move, because if you move the knight, for example, knight to d4, I can trade knights. The bishop defends very well around here. Now, I could actually recapture this point, and these two pawns would be frankly strong. And that is why here the black player, also very strong, finds a fabulous counterattack by giving up the knight, because after pawn takes pawn, he threatens another bishop. Careful, 2 extra pawns for white. But wait, for black, but white has become very active, and let's see how to take advantage of this. Black is threatening our queen, they're threatening our bishop, and in return, we're threatening a knight. Let's see, it looks like black is better here. And many of you would say, hey, if they're threatening so many things, queen for queen and the problem is solved. Wrong, friends, wrong. You shouldn't think like that. You shouldn't think when you're being attacked, I'm going to defend myself. Let's see how I can defend myself. No. The first thing you should think about when you're being attacked is, how can I attack even harder? Because then you would be saving yourself from many more problems. At this moment, if I move the queen away and threaten something superior, like, for example, queen to d4 threatening the undefended rook, it is undoubtedly much more powerful than this bishop. And now we have turned the tables, because they are attacking my bishop, yes, but I am attacking the knight and the rook. Do you see the difference? And on top of that, I keep my queen active. Much better than undoubtedly trading queens and ending up passive. Yes or no? This is where you can tell the difference, right? Between a strong player and an extremely strong player who are always thinking about how to attack more. Careful, bishop to d7 defends the rook and they counterattack us with the queen. What do we do? Well, at this moment, queen takes pawn, and we've simply avoided the bishop's threat. We recover a pawn, although we are still down a pawn, and on top of that, we keep attacking. Conclusion, down a pawn, but we are attacking. And no, be careful, okay? A lot is happening here. That's why I say save this video, friends, to watch this game again when you have time. And really, you'll surely find many things that you hadn't seen at first. If black moves the knight away, they really won't be in a very good position either. Why? Because then we would have this passed pawn, Together with our rook, our queen, and the bishop, we would have a very strong position. That's why black follows their logic and says, I'll attack something bigger. Very well, 5 threatening the queen. And if the queen moves now, what then? Do you know what Mikhail Tal did here, friends? Prepare yourselves for strong emotions. I assure you that most of us, when our queen is attacked, we move it away. Look at what Mikhail Tal does. I'll take a little knight. Hey, but you're completely giving away the queen. Indeed, that's right. Black takes the queen, and Mikhail Tal's idea is that now the rook would come in, capturing the bishop on d7. But not only that, I'm attacking the queen. And later, when the queen moves, I don't care where, in this case, it lands in an excellent position. Because look at how they counterattack again, huh? Queen to c3 attacks the rook. At this moment, the rook is positioned to also attack the f7 point. Pawn takes f7, check, and I'm going to take the rook. And not only am I going to take the rook, but by capturing, I'm going to promote to a queen with check. Therefore, I have these tempos to try to defend what's happening over here later. King takes. And now, watch out, friends. They're threatening one rook with the king. They're threatening the other rook with the queen. They're threatening the bishop with the queen, pawn, and rook. Relax. Let's simplify things. They're threatening both my rooks and the bishop? With this move, I defend both rooks. Go ahead and take my bishop. That's the least serious thing that can happen to me right now, right? And indeed, that's what happens. However, by capturing this bishop, I capture your other one. So I have everything defended, friends, right? I have both rooks defended, and if you take my bishop, I take your other one. Therefore, black moves the bishop away so we can get captured. White does the same. Rook takes a 2. Careful, they have a passed pawn here that's tremendously lethal. If it manages to promote, it would become a second queen for black. However, Mikhail Tal starts activating his pieces here. He creates, let's say, a kind of attack with all his pieces at once, which starts with knight g5. You'll see how interesting it is. If black decides to give up their bishop here, bishop takes, and this other bishop would end up extremely well placed. Queen to c2 doesn't threaten the rook or the bishop, but rather they threaten queen takes f2 check, and subsequently queen takes g2 checkmate. So you have to act. And how do they do it? With knight e4. Suddenly, a knight that was doing nothing on f3, look, attacks the bishop, defends the f2 square. Therefore, this knight is super well placed. And besides, for all those fans of patterns who are in the academy, you know where a knight always goes to block an isolated pawn. Because an isolated pawn has no pawns on the sides, therefore a pawn will never be able to attack this knight, and it also prevents them from advancing. Very good. If it attacks the bishop retreats to e7. Now here is another tremendous move by Mikhail Tal that gives us goosebumps or makes our hair stand on end. An exchange sacrifice, but for what, CHESSTEACHER? For what? Well, in exchange for activating his pieces, bishop d5. You already know that Mikhail Tal was really a bit crazy, huh? He sacrificed his pieces a lot, but his sacrifices really did make sense. Why? Because he sacrificed pieces to activate them. The pieces he had on the board and the active pieces were much stronger than the passive pieces. Check, king f8, rook d8, check, the king escapes, king g7, rook d7, check. The king keeps escaping, and it seems that here Mikhail Tal has run out of options, because if I start giving checks here or here, the king escapes. Well, look at what he does. h4. He continues to boost his pieces even more. Not only does he leave an escape for the king, but watch out, because this pawn can keep advancing. Impressive. Rook a1, the king can obviously escape now thanks to this h4. Rook d1, and here many of you would say, what do we do? Do we trade rooks? No. Or what? Because we have, for example, our opponent has an extra queen, and if we start trading pieces, we're going to have a really tough time. I need pieces to attack. Most of us, myself included, would just take the pawn on b7, right? A free pawn. I keep holding the file. This is what we would all do. Look at what Mikhail Tal does. It looks like he's getting into trouble. Knight to d6. Why? Because he's self-pinning a knight. It looks like he's getting into trouble, but the threat's just too serious. And now, the black pieces, can't really be saved in any way. If they tried to do something like b3 here, something that didn't do anything, checkmate would come immediately in 2 moves. And how would the checkmate go? Well, with bishop to f6 and rook to d8, because the knight covers the g7 square, the f7 square. Therefore, here, black cannot continue without doing anything. They must cover the f6 square. And what do? Well, a very logical move. Queen takes f2, they defend the f6 square, and on top of that, they counterattack with a possible maiden attack, huh? And what do they do here? What does Mikhail Tal do here? Well, he does the following. Knight to f7, check, the king escapes. And here many of you will say, and now what do? I have nothing to do. I capture the rook, which is free, but that doesn't seem like the best idea because then they would capture my knight, and then we would have a serious problem stopping these 3-pass pawns, huh? Because the material would be very even, right? A queen and 3-pass pawns against 3 pieces. Therefore, Mikhail Tal does the following. Bishop to h6. A brutal move, because now it forces, black to place the king over here. And now, yes, he takes the rook. Chess teacher, don't give me any tall tales because here I take the knight anyway. No, because if you take the knight, rook to phone, and I win your queen. Don't tell me this isn't impressive, friends. Well, here what the black player did was the following. I'm going to try to promote the pawn. And you might say, let's see, chess teacher, but aren't you having problems here anyway with the pin on the queen? Yes, actually yes. But here, black can at least try to do something after the capture. You see it? At least now they can try to go and promote these pawns. Chess teacher, it's impossible for Mikhail Tal to lose this position with 3 pieces of advantage. Careful, many of you would say here, he's threatening my knight, I'll move it away. You lose the game. You're no longer defending here, and they promote a queen, huh? And let's see how you stop that. It's not that easy, but there was simply a winning move here, right? The winning move? Pay attention, okay? This pawn advance move was to prevent the bishop from defending the promotion, okay? The winning move here, simply, that Mikhail Tal made is this bishop to c4. Touching the pawn, it can't advance because if it advances, bishop to a2, we're going to stop the promotion anyway. Do you see it? So, after this bishop to c4, black resigned. Impressive or what? You know, friends, I never get tired of recommending the Chess Mind app, which I'll leave for you as always down here in the description. The best app to study everything. You see, vision and tactics. You have a ton of different possibilities, openings. You have more than 60 opening courses. For example, I want to study the Scotch Gambit. Come on, let's dive into the Scotch Gambit. You can study it wonderfully. Once you've studied several lines, you'll unlock, besides the next lines, playing against the machine itself, you'll unlock, for example, model games, Let's see here. For example, here, what can we do? We place it here and tell it, I want you to give me problems from the Scotch Gambit. Perfect, then. We're going to have problems from the Scotch Gambit. I want, for example, to put in model games, right? As I was saying, several professional model games from this gambit have been selected. And this applies to all 60 openings, right? You have middle games to train your middle game, strategy, and end games. This application is the most complete one on the market, without a doubt. You already know it's included in the Academy, but if you don't want or can't pay for the Academy, or you're simply interested in the application, it's undoubtedly a great option. I'm going to leave it for you right down here in the description. I hope you love this video, and we'll see each other tomorrow, as always, friends, in the next one. Save it so you can find it later. Bye.